All right, we are live with our 25th episode of Axe to Grind here on the Arbiter of Worlds Substack. I am Archon Alexander McCrease. I am joined tonight by my special guest, the Critical Dom, Dominic Martin, or Martine.
Martine! Good evening, everybody.
Dominic Martine. Good evening and awesome Lorca Segmentada. Appreciate you donning authentic period Roman armor for the event tonight. That's
Yeah, I'll
excellent.
have to take a shot to the head, probably.
No, it's fantastic. So you were giving me the rundown on this before our chat. So you wore that in a parade for Latin class, correct?
Yeah, so I've got a bachelor's degree in Latin. My wife is a Latin teacher, and she also had a Latin club, and they were going to be marching in our local parade for the 4th of July. So we got a hold of this Lorca. She had a toga on, so we marched in the parade, had ourselves a tremendous time, threw out candy, and I also had the scutum, but that's still at school. More importantly, though, got my gladius right here.
There you go. There you go. Now, and you, so she's a Latin teacher, and you yourself trained historian, MA in history, and then and have taught American history at the college level. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. I've got an MA in American history. My specialty is the American Revolution,
Okay.
and that's from
I've
Ball
heard of
State.
that.
Yeah, I've taught for Purdue down in Anderson. There's a little offshoot called Purdue Polytechnic, and taught there a couple of times. They had me back, and just really enjoyed it. Even though I just run my own business now, professional dungeon master on this end, and that largely came about because we decided it was time to have kids, and we needed different schedules.
Gotcha. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yep. Well, awesome to have you join us on the show tonight. So we're going to talk about your crowdfunding campaign, which has just begun,
Mm-hmm.
literally just begun, as in you launched it when we hit go live. Dungeons and Dragons: An American Institution, and this is a new history book about our favorite hobby.
Yeah, so the impetus for doing this really comes down to what happened in 2024. We wound up getting a couple of books published about the hobby. You got the Making of OD&D book, and then you got John Peterson's Playing at the World's Second Edition. And in both of those, you wind up getting certain aspersions cast on Gygax and Arneson and wargamers in general. So back in December, the Basic Expert had put out a video going over some of these claims of, well, Gary Gygax was a bad man, he was this bad sexist. But in the context of that video, if you can actually read, you'll understand that Gary Gygax is being very sarcastic because those remarks were in 1975, and I'm not even sure they had sold the first 1,000 copies of OD&D yet. So this is a guy in this time period who is being set upon. I use the word broadsided in the video, and because of that, he's going to fight back. He's going to fire back because it's a long stage to go from, in 1970, guy loses his job, to 1973, Arneson runs a Blackmore game, coolest thing ever. Then eventually they print those 1,000 copies and give us this fantastic hobby, which has been around for half a century.
Yep. Well, you've got a video here set up for us. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to kick off with this video, and so we'll let folks get introduced to your campaign. And then we're going to start to interrogate you on wargaming and artisan and aspersions and all the things. Mm-hmm. So let's start by watching this video, though. All right. So hopefully the sound comes through. All right. Let me know if the sound is not coming through, people. All right. Here we go.
The 50th anniversary of Dungeons and Dragons should have been one of gold and glory. Rather than a celebration of the whole history of the hobby, we get books insulting and belittling the founders on whose shoulders they have made fortunes. Instead of limited reprints of old editions, we got Jack. And considering that the developers are now out at Wizards of the Coast, the whole 2024 plan seems to have flopped. But they are in disarray and disordered. Now is the time to rally to Gary Gygax's banner and to put before the whole hobby a book that perhaps is the one we should have gotten. D&D has always been a war game, and so we began in 1824 with Prussia and Kriegspiel. We will consider Strategos and other games as they develop until we get to the post-war period and Avalon Hill, particularly their game Gettysburg and its effects on two men, Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson. Since wargaming is simulating being a general, it is therefore role-playing, and not just the province of that later genre. John Peters is an idiot for complaining that someone has to play Germany or the Confederacy. It's a game. Come on. Certain trends in American life must also be made parallel, ranging from middle-class leisure at the time to feminism, when it comes to the reception of the game, and particularly how Gary Gygax got broadsided by feminism while promoting D&D. The effects and detriments of success must also be weighed, since both men eventually were pushed out of TSR. Then we have the tenure of Williams, the sale to Wizards of the Coast, and then the regular new editions we've come to know, culminating in the current flabby, floppy new edition. Now, to write about all this, I need your support. I have my bibliography and outline, but to get this in front of the hobby in total, I need printing funds and time. This is the way we push back and retake the field that they've left and raise our banner on high. The biggest difference between myself and other writers is that my professional training is in history. You can then expect criticisms of sources, weighing them as they are, endnotes, and a complete bibliography in a single text so you can then judge what I say and check it for yourself. I will not hide sources in a second volume. If what I say is interesting and insightful to others, then I will... Oh, satisfied. Thank you for looking at this project, and I hope that it is worthy of your time.
Okay. So that
The 50th
is the Kickstarter video. Everyone, please, if you're watching it, if you want to support the hobby, go check it out. It's definitely the case. We had the 50th anniversary of Dungeons and Dragons, and it was a whimper rather than a bang. And some of what was said about the creators was so offensive as to make one question whether you want to even be a creator, knowing that your legacy is going to be spat upon in that kind of way. Like, it was really discouraging for me. I can say that for sure. So sounds like you actually read the second edition of Playing at the World. I have not read it. And it really angered you. So let's start there. Let's start with the anger there, like with the core injustice that's motivated you to want to talk about Gary and Arneson and the real story.
All right, now let's start with that premise that wargaming is D&D and D&D is wargaming. Okay, so that leads us to post-war America, and people who are just enjoying playing this game, in which they set up a table. Sometimes it's a sand table. They set up, say, Gettysburg. And then if you're playing that game, one side has to be the Union, one side has to be the Confederacy. All right. Now, Avalon Hill's magazine, The General, was set up to let people contact each other because it was a rather dispersed hobby at the time. And they would be able to put out these notices of trying to find opponents. And if there's one thing wargamers do really enjoy doing, it's talking some trash and trying to get the other guy to drive, however long, 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, to go to the board and then fight it out, right?
Yeah.
Because whenever we do these things, it's going to take a lot of time. I just got done with a game of Warhammer the Old World earlier this evening. It took us 3 to 4 hours to actually, play a few turns and get used to some of the new rules that are here. So I'm actually going to read a little bit from this book so you know where the source happens to be. Now,
all right.
More pointedly, the absence of voices from outside the Anglo-American white male community foregrounds some problematic areas in the, quote, historical recreation practiced by wargamers, notably in the command of Confederate or Nazi forces and the enthusiasm with which some gamers inhabited those roles. This has been the subject of recent scholarly work like Flanagan and Jacobson's Playing Oppression 2023 and Trammell's Playing with Privilege 2023. The recent revelations that M.A.R. Barker, a wargamer and early role-playing game designer, had pseudo-anonymously authored a work glorifying Nazi ideology and served on the editorial board of a Holocaust-denial journal has cast serious doubt on the notion that all of that fascist talk in wargaming was just let's pretend. So let me deal with that first shot there. What effectively is Peterson saying about wargamers? That your hobby, which you enjoy, so long as there is at least one person who has penned or written something that is in fact objectionable, the whole thing is then supposed to be rejected. Okay. I understand people's intuitions that that's in fact stupid on its face and ridiculous, But effectively, it comes out to this, and I tried my hand a little bit of formal logic a little while ago to explain that. So basically, for some of X, if X in fact is a Nazi, then whatever they're doing has to be rejected. Okay, because that means there can be no one who can do it. Wargaming should be rejected because of that. Well, let's just take that formulation. We'll apply it to something else. We'll apply it to anything. Let's apply it to 5th edition D&D. Is there at least one person who plays 5th edition D&D who believes or inhabits something which I do not like? Undoubtedly, there's at least one person.
Yeah.
Am I supposed to then reject the entirety of 5th edition? Well, no. It's okay as D&D, especially if you limit some books. And judging in that fashion, and if I might say policing some tables, I'm going to use that phrase, really just makes it this nonsensical moralizing, which Peterson also says in the beginning he's not going to editorialize, but that doesn't mean he's not going to give his opinion on stuff, which is what I thought it would be at the beginning of the book. Now, so we get that when it comes to wargaming, and eventually, once you do in fact get to Gygax and some of these comments about sexism and whatnot, well, there's no context given for Gary Gygax's actual comments. He doesn't go over what's happening in that time period. We're talking the mid-1970s, okay? You're talking a period of radical feminism and, different breeds of it. Okay, they got different approaches. And because of that, you've got people going on shows, disrupting them. Part of the articles I've written include reference to the Dick Cavett show, because there was one in which you had a couple of feminists on with Hugh Hefner, of all people. And they also had some people in the audience who disrupted the show. So one can expect that to work on a man's opinion of their tactics in the 1970s, regardless of what you think about the goals of feminism in that decade. But because Gary Gygax is also trying to sell something, a brand new something in that time period, well, of course he's going to think a little bit of a different way. He's a businessman. He's trying to actually accomplish something here. So that is a lot of stuff coming off of just a single page here. And if we want to later, I can also go over something that he's done with the time period, with the timeline, and also hiding something that I caught just because I knew I was looking for it. Do any questions arise from what I just said?
Oh, so many. All
right, let's do it.
All right, yeah. All right. So let's start with the notion of wargaming, that the people pretending to be fascists were actually fascists. Now, what's interesting here is that these war games being played in 1975. So the people playing them, if they were in their mid-20s during World War II, they're in their mid-50s then, right? So presumably some large portion of the people playing the war games actually fought in World War II.
Yes.
Or at a minimum, their parents fought in World War II. They were much closer to the struggle than we are now. And so what we have then is 50 years later, we're sort of retroactively casting aspersions on the character of these folks. I find that kind of fascinating. That kind of presentist bias that we have to bring to everything nowadays. I don't consider that to be the mark of a good historian. So I'm disappointed that Mr. Peterson added that to the book. I don't recall anything like that type of approach in the first edition, which I did read. Maybe it was there, but I feel like I would have been I feel like I would have been offended by it. It sounds like the sources were all 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023 that you just cited.
Well, the source basis for the book is mainly fanzines from the time period, especially Alarms and Excursions.
Oh, I meant the articles he referenced about playing with privilege in
2023.
Yeah,
he focuses on fanzines as the source base, so that's where a lot of the research goes into. But you are correct to note how strange it is that he focuses on that, because I later read his Game Wizards. This is great. I really enjoyed reading this. It does a very good job of figuring out where Arneson was going after he was let go from TSR and what he was doing. Because, he's been kicked out. We can talk about the circumstances of that later. But his goal is to eventually get Judges Guild to put out First Fantasy Campaign. He wants to make his mark on the hobby. And then also become a developer, make money that way, because he was a co-creator of the game, period.
Yeah, we should definitely delve into that. going back to the idea that wargamers are role-playing gamers. So, and vice versa. Controversial, I think a lot of people reject that. We have in this hobby right now, there's like this half-heartedly ironic but half-hearted serious contempt between, the theater kids and the wargamers.
Yeah.
I find that really odd. I started playing war games the same time I started playing role-playing games, which was about age 5 years old. And I taught myself long division in order to calculate combat ratios for chit-based war games, right? Like that's literally how I learned division. And at no point in my mind was there ever like this gap between the two. And all the way through even West Point at the West Point War Games Club, we role played the heck out of our war games, right? Like if when I was Emperor Napoleon in a Napoleonic game, like I was freaking all in and speaking with a ridiculous French accent and annoying everybody, like. And the same was true of all of us. Like that was a huge part of the fun, was, as you say, like trash talking in character of the quote unquote enemy, right? So I wonder how much of what Peterson is reacting to is his own inability to differentiate fantasy from reality.
It's his own lack of imagination, to be quite frank. If you can't think for yourself for a moment that these guys who are looking at each other across the table, one's playing Patton, one's playing Rommel, and they can't just enjoy the game itself, then you do have a serious problem. Now, Peterson thinks he's bolstering his case because in the pages of the General, as they go through these various notices, some people might take it a bit too far when it comes to trying to get, say, some Yankee to come by to play the Union, or the Allies to show up to play, the North African campaign. Now, even if we admit that they go too far in their rhetoric, does that mean that they are in fact a terrible person? I wouldn't think so. Just in the same fashion, if a single person is in fact that bad, you shouldn't condemn the entire hobby. Now, what goes on at the table as you're playing across from each other? You are performing an exercise. You are exercising your brain, okay? In these conditions, as this guy, how could perhaps I think of it in a different way to get a different outcome? That's why we play these games. I rather enjoyed teaching the North African campaign because I find it really interesting, because you got a fair amount of open space and you got tank warfare, and it goes back and forth as one would expect. And then the strange thing happens where they deem this kind of idea, Rommel's syndrome, in the pages of the General, and Peterson uses that phrasing. Rommel, the guy who was executed for plotting to assassinate Hitler, who was then implicated, and then he was given the choice of you can either be executed or commit suicide and have a state funeral. He chose the latter. That guy, really?
Yeah. So I actually want to dial back. So you said, some of these people go too far in their rhetoric. Too far according to who? Let me give an example. If you've ever watched a freestyle rap battle, I think we can safely assume that the freestyle rappers do not actually desire to have sex with the opposite rapper's mother. Or, they don't actually cast judgment on their weight or things like that, right? Like it's just freestyle rap, right? It is a shit talk. Like, I just find it kind of bizarre. We're looking back 50 years at a distinct niche culture and evaluating them as if what? That they're on X in the year 2024 and they're not supposed to talk that way. It's very strange. Like, anyway, but I guess that's just the state of history today by so many contemporary writers.
Yes, and that's actually an issue in the American history profession, okay? If you're into the subject, especially the American Revolution, you probably know the name of Gordon Wood, okay? Phenomenal historian. He helped argue back into the mainstream that the American Revolution was a radical thing, because this was a big debate,
Right.
mid-60s or so. And in one of his books, it's simply titled The American Revolution. It's a rather short one, about 200 pages. In his preface, he talks about how the way people are writing at that time period is more about what they have in their politics than it is for the subject itself. If you cannot let the subject itself speak for itself, you're not conjuring up the spirits of the past. You're not bringing those ghosts to bear. You're not really addressing what is happening at that time.
Right.
You're basically doing a self-insert, right?
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, when I only got a bachelor's in history, I didn't get a master's, but, my history professor more or less said, and he was an ancient history professor. He was a famous
Ooh, even better.
Egyptologist named Dr. Gerald Kadish. Dr. Kadish felt more or less that engaging in presentism and judging history from our contemporary point of view was one of the worst sins you could do, because it meant you totally were failing to understand that culture. So, one of the things, like, he taught Assyrian law, among other things. And so you had to,
Wow.
like, put yourself in the place of the Assyrians and really try and understand who they were. And he loved shocking the class with, like, the grotesqueries of Assyrian law, which was, is pretty awful when you read it. You're like, wow, this was a pretty screwed up civilization. But, you had to, like, understand it as they understood it. So, yeah, I guess the past is a foreign country, but man, 50 years ago wasn't that long ago.
No, and unfortunately, a lot of that comes out of the 1960s, as of course your audience would be aware of, particularly the year 1968 and all the problems that happened, campus riots, and eventually
Yeah.
you've got, of course, Vietnam,
Yeah.
driving students over the edge. But a big portion of that, in my opinion, comes down to two things. One, the college campuses did not control their students, didn't put them in their place. That's because they were addicted to monies that came out of the GI Bill. All right. And
Mm-hmm.
then you've got this issue of because of that extremism at that time, a lot of people get pushed out of the academy because they engaged in wrongthink, which is why, as an institution up until that time period, college was considered to be a thing effectively outside of regular society,
Right.
to where you might think of it as a third party, because you could go out into it, you get some quote perspective, then you come back into it, and then you take it however you want because you have been trained.
Yeah.
And we kind of held those ideas for a couple thousand years until we decided to give it up in the last 100 or so.
Yeah. Yeah. Oof. All right. So let's dive back. Let's dive back into the book. So he starts off. He paints this really negative picture of wargamers.
Right.
And then he gets into Gygax himself, and essentially accuses him of being a misogynist. Correct? Based on
Yeah, that's correct. Mm-hmm.
yeah. Now, what's the actual evidence for Gygax being a misogynist? I mean, I know there's actual evidence that the man did a lot of cocaine in Los Angeles, but that's a low standard.
Can I just say for a moment that the D&D Cocaine Mansion was a big reason I was interested in a portion of Gary's history. But as I've read, it's actually become less important and less interesting. So that's been an odd thing about researching.
I
Okay,
mean,
so
listen, you don't need to persuade me. My whole goal in becoming a tabletop game designer was to have a mansion in LA where I could do cocaine. It just hasn't worked out. But I mean, like, we
we'll
all have
get you there.
goals. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so you'll have some chainmail tables, you'll have some piles of coke, Playboy bunnies, and everybody's gonna have a good time.
Yeah. I mean, right now I have like a Mick mansion
Mm-hmm.
and I have Coca-Cola. So like, like
That's pretty close, right?
I feel like I'm making progress, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Anyway. All right.
Now, the accusation of sexism really comes down to Gary Gygax marketing the game to men because, as he says in his own book, 99% of the wargaming hobby is white, middle to upper middle class American males, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And so, because of that, who's Gary Gygax going to try to sell to? The
Yeah.
99% or the 1%?
Yeah, of course.
Answers itself. Now, as for the accusation, it comes in a couple of forms. So, first off, you don't have gender rules in OD&D. You just have the rules as they are, okay? Then a fellow comes up to Gary at one of these conventions and says, well, where are the rules for the women, right? Why don't you have some rules for the women? He effectively says, look, if the women's lovers will actually buy D&D, we'll do rules for them. But at the time, he's trying to sell the game.
Mm-hmm.
And this is taken as, well, he's a misogynist, he's a sexist. A lot of that comes down to this quote from him in Europa 10:11. And if you guys have ever looked into this topic, this always gets beaten like a dead horse. But we have to go back to Europa 6:8 to kind of get the context. So I've got a bit here that I can actually read. If you want to follow along, this is Europa 6-8, page 80. This is from Jack Green, who's the guy doing research about the hobby and who's playing it.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, a woman actually gets to give an opinion here. So she says, there is a school of thought which puts forth the theory that man has an instinctive drive to increase his territorial holdings. Robert Ardrey, author of African Genesis, calls the drive the territorial imperative. Although as a feminist, I object to the use of man as the generic for all humankind, including womankind. In this case, I use it advisedly. The need for constant expansion of territory seems to me to be a male trait. Male dogs, tomcats, roosters, stallions, and bulls are the ones who instinctively assert their masculinity by doing battle with any other male, other species who invades their neighborhood. This is the territorial imperative at work. Man is the only creature who consciously kills others of his own species for sport. Man is the only animal who kills those not of his own species for sport. Man is also the only creature who kills females of his own kind for any reason. At this point, I can almost hear Jack reminding me that this was supposed to be a statement of wargaming, so perhaps I better make my point. After living with an avid wargamer for over a year, I've come to the realization that wargaming is a form of sublimation to the realization that wargaming is a form of sublimation for the territorial imperative, and not a pleasant one at that. It is not to his credit that a man chooses to kill for sport, even if the bodies are only cardboard game pieces. Wargaming is not, like chess, a game of pure strategy. And all the wargamers I have met, and I know several, all male, needless to say, have had strong elements of this homicidal maniac in their nature. A lust for violence, on the game board at least, seems to be a prerequisite for being a wargamer. So far, I have tried to be theoretical and objective, but I am curious to know that there are other women who have shared my feelings of nausea and disgust when my lover has been involved in a war game in the next room, and I've heard him pounding the table, yelling, "Blood must flow!" He is, at that moment, separated from me by a gulf that I don't even want to bridge. It's no wonder to me that so few women are wargamers. I think that tendency to lose touch with one's humanity is a trait generally shared by far more men than women, with wargaming as a prime example. So, gentlemen, you, being unable to overcome your instincts, are merely exercising your territorial imperative, and in doing so, you cannot overcome it. You have no free will. You are now reduced to nothing more than your sex, and now you will simply fall in line and you will be gelded like the bull. So,
Wow.
what is she doing there? She is actually taking this position that men only actually do this because they have an instinctive need to do so and cannot overcome it. Okay. And I had mentioned beforehand that the Basic Experts video on this very subject is part of what led me to actually go through all this. Okay. And that's why I was looking for the source when it came to Peterson's book. Now, Gygax in the very next issue, 1011, responds sort of to this, and this is used as a bludgeon against us as well. Now, y'all can actually read, so just kind of see the words in your head and think about how that goes.
So just pause you there. So what you had just read was a contemporary feminist of the 1970s sending a letter to the editor to Europa magazine.
Effectively, she was asked by Jack to give a statement on wargaming, and then as a feminist, that was her response. Okay.
Yep. Okay.
So I made a point in my various articles I've written for Substack that the anti-misogynist movement also made misandrous, so something to keep in mind. So when Gary Gygax responds, this is after he has been set upon by people saying there ought to be rules for women. Where are the women? Why aren't we doing the women? Because you can't apparently make a character who's a woman in OD&D. And his response is, I have been accused of being a nasty, old, sexist male chauvinist pig, for the wording in D&D isn't what it should be. There should be more emphasis on the female role, more non-gender names, and so forth. I thought perhaps these folks were right and considered adding women in the raping and pillaging section, in the horrors and tavern witches chapter, the special magical part dealing with hags and crones, and thought of perhaps adding an appendix on medieval harems, slave girls, and going Viking. Damn right I am a sexist. It doesn't matter to me if women get paid as much as men, get jobs traditionally male, and shower in the men's locker room. They can jolly well stay away from wargaming in droves for all I care. I've seen many a good wargamer, and wargames spoiled thanks to the fair sex. I'll detail that if anyone wishes. Now, if it is the case that you are trying to sell to the 99%, and you've got these people biting your ankles, are you going to take them seriously, or are you going to respond in a sarcastic manner? This is a Midwestern man. He has 5 kids, and he has to support his family. He's going to be sarcastic. And that's a huge difference with how people actually present this as a piece of evidence. Evidence against the entire hobby, really. because we can only be reduced to the territorial imperative, and Gygax was exhibiting that. So that's part of the problem there.
So it's interesting. There's a lot going on here. So, yeah, man, I don't even know where to begin. This is like fractal levels of wrongness.
Does have ACKS have rules for that? Does it?
Listen, ACKS has rules for a lot of really awkward things. So, like it's a simulation, and but so first off, like it's clear to me, yes, more men than women play war games. And I would actually say that it likely is due to biological reasons, right? Like there are different biological drivers that make men more interested in certain things than women. That makes me an essentialist, so be it. I would be comfortable standing behind the science and history in that. Where I take issue with her is I think it's a good thing, right? Like I think it's great that there are products for everyone, but I don't think every product has to be for everyone. Like there are books my wife reads that I read and think are great, and there are books that my wife reads that I don't want to read because they're not for me, and vice versa. And I think the world is a better place for that kind of it. And what really galls me, I think, about that statement you read is her sense of disgust that God forbid her husband might have this masculine interest that she doesn't share, right?
Right. So she is his lover. I don't know if they were actually hitched,
Lover,
but
lover,
they've only been
yes.
together for, say, a year.
Yeah.
But he has this thing he does in the other room that she's not a part of.
Right.
There's also a fundamental change in American life in the post-war period where you don't really have, we can say, masculine and feminine spaces and social situations as much. But you have to get some off-the-cuff remarks from somebody like Groucho Marx to actually understand the stuff is going on. Where, say, after dinner, okay, everybody's kind of been together. The men and the women get separated. They go into their different rooms. They chat, probably tell some dirty jokes, maybe smoke a cigarette, smoke a cigar, and then just chat for a while. And it was a different kind of social situation. And I have to say, I'm under the impression that probably helps people get stuff off their chest easier being in a single sex situation there, right? Because, the locker room is a particular kind of space and it's treated in a certain way.
Yeah. I mean, that was definitely the case, I think, for a really long time throughout. You see it all the time in older movies that after the dinner party or whatnot, the men go to the men's lounge, the smoking lounge, the cigar bar, whatever.
Right.
And
He's
then
got his private club he goes to.
Yep. And then they're doing their manly chatting and they get things off their chest and their voices become deeper. And then, and then the women go into the other room and then you always have like the Victorian scene where they're very catty to each other and she says, "Bless your heart," or, something like that. Like, I mean, it's so common, right? It's a stereotype. We're laughing because we've all seen it happen. And now we're pretending shock and outrage that people used to behave that way. Like that's just how humans behaved for most of history.
Sure. And I doubt she'd want Wargaming to be happening right in front of her. So it's got to be in the other room then.
That's right. That's right. No. Yeah. So, I mean, I guess if the standard to be acceptable to someone like that is that you have to say, no, men are only allowed to engage in activities that women want to engage in, then I guess most
that which she approves, right?
Yeah.
She has to approve it.
Yeah. So Sir Urus says, while all waves share this, the misandric naivety of feminism during the 1960s and 70s is of particular note. Yeah.
There's certainly some extremists, and I'm actually going to be using this in the book itself. So there's a feminine theorist, Marilyn Fry, okay? And she wrote this book, Politics of Reality. And in it, she goes over a lot of the stuff about how anger is inherently justified, how the worst representation of the patriarchy is, in fact, a homosexual male because he is doing dudes for dude reasons. And if we look back, we can kind of see where some of these trends go. But we can also try to pick apart some of her ideas and then show how they were expressed at the time. Because there are people who think like this. And because of that, they're very aggressive on it.
Yeah. So what's interesting then, though, is if it's now 2020 25, and this book has come out to celebrate the 50th history of Dungeons and Dragons. And what becomes then sort of the horrible retrospect is that the critics of Gygax won that culture war, right? Because the 50th celebration of Gary Gygax is celebrating their views rather than his views.
Yeah, that's entirely accurate. So it's kind of in the 2019-2020 era of 5th edition that they go from having some pretty good products to where the adventures start getting worse. And also they start getting people who go ahead and check for cultural sensitivities. We're going to have a reader in here. It's also when around that time that that Daniel Kwan guy started whining about Oriental adventures. And because they saw that happening probably online, Wizards of the Coast decided to take that approach to it, assume it's the entire hobby, and then put out a couple of products which, people don't exactly like. Now, they did publish the Making of OD&D book, and it has those dumb statements from Tondro and Peterson in the beginning that the book didn't need whatsoever. It could have just been a reprint, and grognards would love it. But they didn't. What's going on here? Now, it's worth noting that Playing Out the World is published by MIT. They've got this kind of history of gaming series that they're doing, but from what I've seen from the titles, it's not exactly good material, in my opinion.
So, poor Orc Child wants to know when the feminazi space communist utopia happens that we've been promised.
That was Radiant Citadel. It already happened.
You know, I met a feminazi once, and I was really disappointed that she did not wear a leather Hugo Boss outfit. Very disappointing.
I hate this phrase. She didn't have that drip.
Anyway. Yeah, man, this is kind of wild then to think about. So Gary, in his own way, was living through the woke revolution of his time, right? Like, so because 68, that starts to heat up and it becomes a really big deal through the 70s. So here he is, he's actually creating in the face of that. And then just as he hits his success, interestingly enough, he then gets hit by the backlash from the other direction of the conservative backlash of the moral majority that comes in with the satanic panic and the Christian scare. So that's interesting, because I've always sort of taken for granted that, they lived in sort of eras where they didn't have to deal with that sort of thing as much as the creators. But I'm wrong, right? Like there's Gary. He was having to deal with it. And he got hit from the progressive left, the feminist left, and then he got hit from the conservative right, the Christian right.
He's buffeted on both ends, really. That's why, I know his political views change over time, but I've never actually charted them.
Yeah. Gosh, I mean, no wonder he went to LA and started doing cocaine with that type of pressure. What else can a man do?
Well, if I may, when he did go off and he enjoyed his time at the D&D Cocaine Mansion, he and his wife had recently divorced. D&D was being successful. The Blooms were kind of taking care of things, and he was trying to get a Hollywood movie made. And it's the 1980s. Reagan is, president. What you going to do? You are going to play the game, which is a game where you take a razor, you put a little line of white dust, and, enjoy yourself.
Yeah. No, it was a different era for sure. Definitely. It's definitely a different era. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about what motivated you to do the book and other findings. So you said that you actually had discovered something that was an outright falsehood, I think, in Peterson.
Yeah, so Peterson entirely skipped over some evidence to try to make a point of his, and entirely has to do with what I just read to you guys. Okay, so Europa 6-8 comes out, and he brings up this statement about how wargaming is at the time. He then takes it to be representative, and then he doesn't actually give Gygax his voice in his effective response afterwards, okay? Now, much later in the book, when going over the Dragon issue number 3, you have to go to the back of the book, into the endnotes, to actually find out that he blames Gygax for it instead of Tim Kask, who is the editor of the Dragon. Now, if you have ever looked into the history of the Dragon, Tim Kask demanded independence from TSR and Gygax in order to actually do what he wanted to, because he was a trained journalist. He was a trained journalist in that time, and he would be responsible for his budget and everything. and he demanded that independence to make a good product.
Mhm.
And it's because he didn't want the dragon to only be a house organ where they would go over TSR stuff.
Right.
So they're putting out all this stuff. And in Dragon number 3, they put out this article, and it's on rules for women in OD&D, which up until this point, well, guess what? They've been asked about it. Okay. Let me see if I can pull it up real quick, because we have an amazing archive of Dungeon Magazine online.
Mhm.
And because of that, well, from what we just saw, from what I have been reading, what I've been talking about, is anything actually going to satisfy these people when, say, TSR puts out something that does address the issue of women in D&D? The answer is no. And for some reason, it doesn't want to come up. But let me just talk about it this way. So there are a fair amount of rules. It's by this guy, Lynn Lakofka. And in it, it gives these different stats and these different ways to approach being a woman in the game, and about how they effectively can do a kind of seduction ability against men.
Yeah, it's a very famous
And
article. Yeah.
and then also there's a way an ugly woman can like scare a man to death. Roughly like Medusa, if you actually know some mythology and enjoy that kind of a thing. And I know recently a couple of D&D YouTubers did a video on that exact thing. It was D&D Shorts and Jenny Dye. And although some of it might have been sarcastic, they seem to be taking this as being official material. Well, it's basically an extra thing. You don't have to use it. A guy on his own came up with these rules. TSR has been told, hey, where are the rules for women? And then people are not satisfied because they can't be satisfied because they always want more. So this, I think, helps us justify Gygax's attitude in this period when it comes to being set upon by these people. He is trying to get a company started, and there's no real guarantee of success. And this is actually something Peterson charts quite well. You don't know how it's going to go. You're going to these conventions, and you're also having to fight simultaneously in print in these magazines in order to defend what you're making, the rules of it, especially in the pages of A&E. And then also you got this whole sexism angle. So the fact that he's combative, in my opinion, makes a lot of sense because he's the man.
Yeah. So there really is no way to win this particular debate, and I'm going to speak from experience in this regard.
Mhm.
In ACKS, there is no mechanical difference between male and female characters, right?
Mhm.
Disregarding any biological data points about differences in male strength versus female strength. All
Sure.
of that is tossed out the window in the interest of just having a fun fantasy game. If you want to be Red Sonja with an 18 strength, by all means, be Red Sonja with 18 strength. All good by me, right? So there are literally no mechanical differences between male and female characters. And then there are several character classes that are only available to females because they represent like certain clerical orders for female goddesses. The other classes are not restricted. So you can be a female crusader, but the blade dancer class is female only. And on the basis of that, the game was accused of being misogynistic. So at that point, I gave up, and I'm like, you cannot win this debate because there's only benefit to being a female character in ACKS. There's genuinely only benefit, and yet, So I imagine poor Gary. There's nothing he could have won, nothing he could have done to win this debate. You just are not. You're just gonna lose. The end. So.
Right. But what we can do is contextualize what is going on, and then, in my opinion, demonstrate that for the time period, TSR actually did pretty well by women. So first off, in OD&D, no difference between a man and a woman. Why? It's simulating pulp fantasy.
Yeah.
So if you are a Robert E. Howard fan, you've got Valeria, okay, you've got Dark Agnes as characters, and you got Baelite, you got the entire panoply of women characters, which he writes, and they come in every size, shape, and form. Some of them are comparable to Conan, even if he is still, in fact, the best man around. And even if no one becomes queen by her own hand, generally he respects them and does pretty well. Now, we are, of course, keeping to the Robert E. Howard stories, not going beyond that, because there are, of course, different eras of Conan.
Yeah.
But say even at AD&D, when it comes to playing a female character, yeah, she's very slightly limited in strength, but it's 18 and then 50%. Nobody's really making that, right? So you got a 1/6 to the third, and then up to 50%. You are going to be much stronger than almost anybody else in the entire game because of that. Now, when it comes to the female classes and ACKS, those are actually pretty cool, because I got a friend who wanted to try out the whole Blade Dancer thing, and I went over a little bit of the information there, and he had a good time with it. And then there's also that the Dwarf Lady class, which I want to try at some point. The name escapes me for the moment.
Furnace Wife.
Furnace Wife. There we go.
Yeah.
So that'd be a good time. But what just so happens with TSR is that let's start with this. Okay. D&D gradually gets novels. Okay. It becomes a big part of TSR's business.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in 1976, Andre Norton, who was a rather famous fantasy sci-fi writer at the time, she goes and plays D&D with Gygax. And I want to throw it out there, guys. A sexist in the 1970s is not going to let a woman play his game, okay? And unfortunately, if we are taking that attitude to its extremes, it's much like the cover of, say, the game Battleship. You got the dad and the son, they're having fun after dinner, they're playing the game. Mom and the daughter, well, they're in the kitchen. They don't get to play the game. But Andre Norton plays the game with Gygax, and then she writes Quag Keep, okay? Mm-hmm. Which is not only the first D&D book, but also written by a woman. And it's also about Greyhawk, his baby, okay? And then much later, you get Darlene, who eventually does a lot of art for TSR. Now, I actually had to go pretty deep to find this small nugget of information, but Tim Kask has talked about in his various interviews that he was the one who actually pulled her in as talent because she'd been rejected by TSR. Initially, I was under the impression that was a management decision, okay? And I thought, okay, maybe it's like Gygax and Bloom and maybe somebody else. Turns out, from more recent one of his Curmudgeon in the Basement blogs, how we want to call those, it was David Sutherland who rejected her. So then she goes, she does artwork for the dragon. Gygax sees it, likes it, and I know she's got art in the AD&D DMG. Okay, that's Gary's baby. Okay, the only book that's even comparable to it is your judge's journal, right? The JJ.
Yeah. Exactly. Like when you look at what he actually does, his business choices, we don't see much evidence of actual misogyny. We see much.
None of my opinion. In fact, rather the opposite.
Rather the opposite.
That his business acumen, which in part they got lucky, because in business you always get lucky, but talent and merit went out with him, and because of that, you have a lot of women who wind up working for TSR, who wind up not only being the typists. Okay, that's women's work. Back in the 1970s, you had the lady who was doing the secretarial stuff. They have designers, they have writers. I mean, the queen of D&D, Margaret Weiss, okay, practically our most famous author, Dragonlance. There you go.
Yep. And that's coming in the 1980s, right? Like Dragonlance is not, it's not like 20 years later or something. It follows on relatively fast from the rise to prominence. Yeah. So have you ever seen, there's this very funny meme where it circulates on Twitter a lot, where the guy says, I got involved in racist communities, and I was really surprised because they don't care what race you are as long as you're racist. Right? And which is very funny. And that in its weird way is really analogous, I think, to how nerd communities that I've been in have felt with regard to things like gender, ethnicity, etc. They genuinely don't give a shit about them as long as you're there for the game or the nerd hobby, right? Like they're the most welcoming people. But when the problem happens is when the hobbyists, the practitioners, are expected to change core aspects of the hobby to accommodate sort of the entryists, and then it becomes and then is where sort of the crisis ensues. So, for instance, if you really love complex turn-based war games, which are highly detailed simulations, and you get told, no, we need to simplify the game to make it more accessible. They're getting upset. They're not getting upset because they don't want women to play. They're getting upset because they want a complex simulation, right? And this, I think, this misunderstanding, and I think it's a purposeful misunderstanding by those who work against the nerds. But this misunderstanding or misattribution, I mean, we've seen a lot of it in video games over the last 10, 15 years, has been the target. It was the target of war games and RPGs in earlier eras. So
right, it's like it moves around almost like a disease, and then it goes onto a new host.
Yeah. I mean, and this has been documented as well on. There's a lot of really interesting memes on like the circle of the entrance, like go create your own space. Oh, we were kind of.
We've always been here. Gary didn't play that way. That kind of stuff.
Yeah. It's
because the most recent one would be the whole furor over that Stellar Blade game.
Yes, exactly. And so the start of me being canceled as a person actually came from an essay I wrote on this very topic back in 2013 at the height of Gamergate. And when I compared video games to cars, and I talked about the fact that in the car industry, it's just really clearly understood that you make different types of cars for different buyers. Like the buyer who buys a Ferrari is different than the buyer who buys a Lamborghini, is different than the buyer who buys a Volvo, and some car companies like Subaru famously and very specifically targeted lesbians, right? Like this is well known. Like Subaru had a whole ad campaign aiming at lesbian women as their buyers. And it was fine. Like that's actually a really successful way to run business. You have cars for every demographic. So nobody is left out, but not every car is designed with every person in mind. The guy who wants a Jeep Wrangler is probably different than the girl who's buying the Subaru, and that's okay. But if you try and say the same thing about video games or role-playing games or books, people have a meltdown. It's a thought crime.
Right. Everything becomes gray goo because everything is samey. That's actually why I gravitated rather gradually to older D&D, especially, say, Beckmere Rule Cyclopedia, because you actually do not have, the whole build culture that we do have in the hobby, partially due to 3.5, I'm willing to say, and then beyond. But you're just a dwarf. You're just an elf. And then the people who have varied things about them, well, they're just people. Everybody can die at 0 hit points, but if you survive, humans take off because they're more dynamic. And I prefer that kind of gameplay.
Yeah, it's different. So hang on. Hey, Chubby. So to be clear, Chubby, what we're saying is that we think it's a good thing that Subaru marketed to lesbians, right? Like this is what I was saying. Like I think this is actually an acceptable thing to do. And so anyone who's listening to this video and wants to quote me, like, please go Subaru, yay. But also Jeep Wrangler, yay. Yeah, I'm down with it. Exactly. All right.
You got to market, you find it, and you market to it. And guess what? You make money, people get the product, you're good to go. Okay? You don't publish the OD&D making of book and spend a few pages poo-pooing Gygax and Arneson and then expect the grognards to pay $100 for that book. I admit it. I bought it. I bought it to write what I'm doing, and I bought it on sale, but it still feels dirty sometimes because I have to flip through those pages.
Very dirty, man. Yeah, can't believe you went there. So Sir Urist says you can't be more canceled than what you already are. Oh yes, I could be. Oh yes, I have friends who have bהם more canceled than me. I mean, I've had a few bad breaks, but I've had friends that have been debanked. They you can really get hosed if you're not careful. So yeah. Nor Scorpion, you underestimate the internet, Urist. Don't underestimate my power. All right, so let's see.
It may in fact be unlimited power.
So what else are you tackling in the book? What else are you tackling in the book? So obviously those were like the hot topics that got you motivated, but there's more going on. So what else are you tackling?
Well, I'm also interested in how the game changed over time. So what I've got is a print-on-demand copy of Chainmail, because as far as the gameplay is concerned, it comes out of Wargaming because it's D&D, and Chainmail is required in the OD&D book to actually play it. But a lot of people didn't actually play it, and one of the funny things about reading Alarms and Excursions is that they immediately talk about how we don't need this thing. It says you need it, but we don't need it. We're just going to do what we want. Well, there's some stuff you don't get in there, particularly how you're supposed to kind of scale the game up when it comes to leading men in particular, when you go beyond, say, like a few henchmen and whatnot. And along with that, I'm pretty sure that you don't even have the rules for initiative without actually doing chainmail. So what I'm also doing is building up 2 chainmail by starting with Kriegspiel, by starting with, say, Totten's Strategos, because eventually that gets into the hands of Dave Wesley, who then gets the Twin Cities guys working on stuff. And that gives rise to his Strategos N and his Strategos, I think, A for Ancient. And the way in which they played gave us the basis of the hobby, because the Twin Cities is where the magic really does wind up happening, because in general they are rather impatient with Avalon Hill's release schedule, and so they keep coming up with their own games, they keep coming up with their own variants, and they're also at the same time, and this is rather common for wargaming in that time period, they are playing at different levels all at the same time. So let's just skip forward to Arneson. You got Blackboard. You got the Blackboard Dungeon. Okay. Then you've got people working at different levels. Okay. You've got your barons, your dukes, and so on. These are the kinds of people who would actually play diplomacy by mail, because to them, diplomacy was a war game. Now, I've never thought of diplomacy as a war game till I started reading this stuff and researching it. I tried it like once, maybe twice in college, and I didn't like how it played. But at the same time, they're playing diplomacy. They're setting a national budget. They're creating an army, okay? They are sending letters to other people in the mode of that ruler, and then getting a response, okay? To His Most Excellent Catholic Majesty Charles V of Spain, that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And then because of that, I consider that role-playing. I don't know who wouldn't. They have a national budget, they have an army, and they're also doing diplomacy at the same time. And because of all that, they are effectively creating a new genre, which Gygax at some point calls the 4th category. Rob Kuntz has written a book by that same name. And because of that, he's trying to get at what the essential special sauce was that Arneson came up with, which, as the legend goes, he was watching some horror movie, eating popcorn, reading Conan. And then because of whatever Conan story it was, Conan was in a dark dungeon, probably because he was captured. And then he gets this notion of, what if I'm slinking around in a dungeon? And I don't know, maybe Dracula's on the TV. What if Dracula's out there and he might come at me from behind? And that's the beginning of the dungeon. That's the beginning of the torch timer. That's why you have to carry all that stuff with you into the dungeon, because it's an expedition. And then all these wargaming ideas build up into it, to where you're doing an expedition. You are tracking rations. You are checking how much weight you've got on you, okay? All these mechanics, they're also training you to think in a particular way. Recently, I've done some other shows, and it was also kind of brought up that these guys were also thinking about the fact that they might get drafted into Vietnam if they don't have, special status as, say, a college student or something else. Maybe they're too old. But if you're working on a war game, at least, you've got some training and decision-making should the situation show up. Even if it is in a dense jungle, there are some actual ideas that are consistent when it comes to wargaming that you can then apply in that situation. So you've got this tremendous background of wargaming. You've got people calling each other to make diplomacy moves, okay? Or they're sending letters to each other.
Absolutely.
They are simultaneously trying to set up these tables where they're actually going to do the war game itself, okay? So if you're doing Napoleon versus the Russians, you can do that. And so they'd all show up at somebody's house and play the game. So there's a lot going on here, and it's all interesting. And that's even before, really, we get into AD&D.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so among other things, I used to be part of a group, the New York War Games Association. It was run by this guy, Artie Conliffe, who created some pretty well-known war games.
Cool.
This was back 20 some years ago. But, when you would go to Niwa and you would play Tactica or Spearhead or Armadi or Shaco, again, it's like you're saying, like, people would address each other, and there was like an element of role play that was involved. That was just part of the fun. And they had, these long running campaigns at different points where they would message each other as, your Imperial Majesty, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like it was all, if you read Tony Bass's Hyborian campaign, same thing, right? In many ways, in fact, I would say those early wargamers were role playing more than some of what you saw in when role playing games became more mainstream and more just sort of like crunch, min max optimized, right? Like I've
Oh,
seen
sure. Yeah.
I've seen wargamers in character theater kidding more than role playing gamers. Yeah, the genres I believe are much closer than people want to acknowledge. And I've kind of put my money where my mouth is in that. Like if you look at the games I design, like ACKS is
Oh,
purposely straddling that. Yeah.
really?
So yep, there we go. There it
Yeah,
is.
I'm not going to grab it. I might fall off because of the armor, actually. I didn't count for encumbrance on this. I should have had it out. But no, my guys had actually tested ACKS II this past Thursday. They had a good time. And really, all I set it up to do was we were doing one of the Caves of Chaos. I think it was Cave C. I just threw a bunch of goblins in there. And I said, all right, guys, you've been playing 5th edition for a long time. This is how the game's going to run. We're doing your thing in turns. You guys are moving in a formation. Who's up front? Who's behind? And then what you're facing, okay? And then you're going to explore, find some stuff, and we're going to figure this game out. And I have to say, the Thief's Shadowy Senses was actually way cooler than I expected, because he actually came upon some goblins who didn't see him. He was able to report that back. And then they didn't have to roll for surprise when they went and tried to get, those goblins goose.
Yeah.
Cleaving was hilarious. I had a goblin almost kill 2 characters because of it.
Right. Yeah. Shadowy Senses, when it suddenly triggered for me, I felt like was such a key insight into making the gameplay better. And you think about it, you're like, okay, so for 25, I guess 50 years now, we've had this game where thieves are supposed to be able to sneak around in the dark, but they can't see in the dark. And then elves and dwarves just by default get to have thermal vision. It was very strange. So you just strip all of that out. And I had taken away the infravision from elves and dwarves back in the 1st edition. But giving thieves the shadowy senses in the 2nd edition has proven to be a really good decision.
Which, no dark vision, awesome.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's phenomenal because I run a lot of 5th edition games because you have to deal with that. You have to constantly think in your head, who's got what senses, who's outside of the torch, is it low light, it's a bright light, because then you're just going back and forth on this chart for every character. And I think it's just too much of a pain.
Yeah.
Because it takes away from the game. You were talking about things becoming too crunchy and what's the phrase I've heard people use? Your character sheet is more like a punch card, where you're just say pressing a button to get the effect that you want, as opposed to, okay, so you said this about this wall, it's a 10 by 10 section. I'm going to go ahead and check that for traps or a secret door. The game master rolls a die, get a 1 or a 2, maybe you find something.
Yeah.
Because you are specifically interacting with the environment, as opposed to, I'm going to cover this entire room with a single roll, right? And because the player's doing it, they have a scope of how well they have done, because they're the cool kids. When early on, D&D, Blackmoor, Greyhawk, very, very different, where you might not even have the character sheet. You may just be saying, I want to do this, and then you get told if it succeeds or not, which is an interesting idea.
So hearing you talk about some of the stuff, so we just got a question for you. So let me pull it up. Since Dom has experience running 5e, I'd be interested in hearing his take on the 24 books and the changes they made. So I think they mean the 2024 edition.
Yeah. So let's see. When did I make this commitment? I think it was around the time that the Dragonlance book came out, and it was absolutely horrid. That I was just done getting any books for 5th edition. And then they start coming up with this mealy-mouthed idea that they're going to come out with a new edition of the game. And they change the story constantly. Is it going to be compatible? Is it not? And because of that, I told my guys well ahead of time, we're not going to go to this. I'm not getting new core books. Because if it's just a 5.5, why would I switch to that when I can just run with the books I've already paid an obscene amount of money for? Okay. Then with what I've seen, because I did look at the playtest material, I just dismissed it out of hand. When in like one of the first 1 or 2 playtests, they wouldn't let monsters critically hit. that told me the design direction that they're going to go, and so I dropped it like a brick. Because
Mm.
I played for that for one night. I told the guys, all right, I'm going to experience beige tonight. I cannot crit you guys, but you can crit me. Let's go. We're going to try it. And it was this terrible, terrible experience. And the guys actually felt bad for me. My luck is bad enough as it is. When I get that 20 and I got to get in their faces, it's great. But I couldn't because I couldn't get the crit.
Yeah. So I hadn't realized that. So they removed crits from the monsters.
That was in the playtest material. I think they stopped that for the final version of it because they actually did, take some advice from people. Yeah. But it was the books themselves, that design direction, the fact that it was going to be set up for VTT the entire time. Now, I use one because it's convenient and I can switch between maps really easily. Yeah. But at the time, guess what I was thinking about? I was thinking about loot boxes. I was thinking about how they had this person come on from Microsoft who was all about, I can't remember the stupid marketing term that they were using at the time, where, it's going to be recurrent user spending, okay? Because you want to get that new limited edition purple sword, right, for a character on the VTT. And so, if you buy a chest, there's going to be some gems in there, and maybe you get it right, you get the golden mimic. You'd probably have to buy monsters, buy characters, and then also you're going to have to require a subscription. No, hell with that. Look, originally this game was $10, OD&D. Okay, that's about $60 or so today. Whole game. Okay, you can do so much with it. A few more bucks, you get chainmail. A few more bucks, you get dice, and that could have been your entire game. Yeah. Core books now, God, they raised the prices too, and yet it's inferior quality. It's just not worth it, man.
Yeah. I mean, so as a businessman, I am sympathetic to their desire to have recurring revenue from tabletop games. If you look at various expenditures that people have on hobbies, you want to go out and see a movie. It's very, you look at the cost, or you go out drinking and ordering drinks or whatever, all these different hobbies and recreational activities that people do. Tabletop gaming is, in terms of cash, one of the least expensive. And in terms of the skill required to be a really good tabletop game designer, I mean, it's got to be at least as hard as being a good novelist or something like that, right? Like it's a fairly cognitively challenging profession. And but a novelist will sell you a book for $4.99 or $19.99, whether you buy it hardcover or paperback. You read it in 4 to 6 hours, and then if you want another book, you have to buy another book. Whereas, the tabletop game designer sells you the game, and then you never really need to buy another thing. So I have some sympathy for their desire to get recurring revenue. It's just at every point when they've had like a decision of, well, how could we best make that? How could we best accomplish that? How should we best do that? It feels like their approach has been to take things away or to make the game worse rather than to add value and make it better. So.
Okay. Let's just kind of do a hypothetical for a moment.
Sure.
Let's say parallel universe happens and a lot of this 2019, 2020 stuff doesn't happen. Tondro and Pearson don't make those statements in the Making of OD&D book. And then they come out with a new edition of the game, okay? And then they say, with these books, you get the PDF copy for free, plus you get basically this introductory package where all the stuff that's in those books is also what you get in the VTT. At the same time, they have other packs ready to go that you would then purchase if you wanted to for, say, a small fee. Would that then be enough of an incentive for people to feel better about it? I think it would have.
Yeah.
Had we not had the OGL crisis, that would have been another good step. But rather than make these better business decisions, they just kind of kept stepping on the rake until they've broken their nose.
Yeah. So, okay, so here's a question for you. So you're doing this deep dive into the history of D&D, which means you've spent a lot of cycles pondering the ups and downs, the sine curve, right? So now here we are. We're clearly at another inflection point in that D&D sine curve, right? I would love to hear your predictions. Where is D&D, not RPGs as a whole, but D&D 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now? So are we, is it they've screwed it up and it's over? Is it we're going to have a low point and we're going to bring it back? Like, what do you think is going to play out?
I think there are two distinct possibilities. And it's largely because they've already had more people leave the company recently than when I made that video.
Yeah.
Their designers are gone. Mike Marles is gone. Where's the talent left in that company? So either they'll just try to maybe shop it out, do some crossover stuff, and then try to make a little money that way. Maybe just come out with a few books for 2024 and then let it lie fallow. My understanding is that Hasbro really just holds on to IPs.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm willing to bet, much like did happen with 4th edition, they let it go for a little bit, let things die down, people forget stuff because people don't have memories anymore. Then they try to bring it back in some fashion. I can see them doing that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, unfortunately, you know, Lich-like, it's going to keep going.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. To me, I think they're going to probably push it into trying to be a more of a multimedia brand than a tabletop game brand. So like if you think about Warhammer, for instance, right? Like you've got all these Warhammer video games, Warhammer novels, you know, they have Warhammer miniatures, they have Warhammer tabletop games, Warhammer video games. Like they've done a better job, I think, than Dungeons and Dragons has in creating an entire ecosystem.
Yeah, I got a Warhammer book right here.
Yeah, like and it's paid off, right? You know, when people were making jokes about Donald Trump being the God Emperor they were referencing was the 40K God Emperor, right?
Right.
Like, what's the piece of D&D IP that's had as much resonance as anything from Warhammer 40K? I don't think there is any, right? Like, I don't.
No, because it's eminently memeable. Okay. You've got people who love the lore so much they go very deep into it. They'll have debates about their favorite Primarch and who's a better boy.
Yeah, exactly, right. And so they've managed to transcend the game with the lore. So if I'm Wizards and I'm looking at the future, I'm looking at the brands, looking at, you know, the state of play, like that's what I would have done. I would have really been emphasizing building out that lore. But the problem is they couldn't do that because you know, Warhammer, for whatever else you want to say about them, they've really done a pretty good job of avoiding letting the lore get too infested by contemporary values, right? Like at the end of the day, Space Marines are still Space Marines, like et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there's some debate about it, yada yada. But for the most part, it's pretty much stayed true to its own values. Whereas I just don't think,
despite external pressure, because that has been happening to them.
Yeah, the folks at Hasbro, I just don't think had the wherewithal to do it, to really lean into it. You know, because like they could have done it with Dark Sun. Dark Sun was fantastic IP, but you know, too problematic for them. So,
I mean, you tell me Cannibal Halflings, I'm there, and I brought cookies. I mean, it's a great joke, and it's also awesome.
Yeah.
Exactly. But I mean, if we're gonna parallel, let's say Forgotten Realms and 40K. Because 40K has so many great characters. Well, who comes to mind for the Forgotten Realms, though, as a character? Volo comes to mind. I always played him as this bumbling drunk, which I thought was really funny.
Yeah. I always found the Forgotten Realms the least interesting of the available D&D worlds, which I think was why it was also one of the best to play in, right?
Right, you make your mark.
You could just make your mark, and it was very generic, etc. You know, like, but in terms of like IP to tell story in Dragonlance or Dark Sun or Ravenloft, I think would have all been vastly superior in that regard.
Oh yeah, Paul just pointed out they did this thing where they were kind of implying that the Adeptus Custodes could be the women's.
Yeah. Oh, we got a whole bunch of comments actually here. Let's throw some of these up. So okay, so we got. Let's see. All right. So Sly Blue Demon says, I think we'll get a 6th edition
Sly.
when they revert 5th edition stuff. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. After the Elf book comes out, we can finally live out the Dwarf Elf Wars of history. Yes.
Oh, I forgot you're working on an Elf book. I could do the War of the Beard then.
Yes.
In ACKS. That'd be phenomenal.
Their efforts to turn D&D into a lifestyle brand didn't stick. I think it's because they betrayed the people for whom it was an actual lifestyle and chased posers. But that's my opinion. But I think it could have succeeded, but I
think it's also accurate. I mean, what you'll note is people that they're trying to cultivate, they've got a bad habit of not buying things.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's not. Let's see. So Jurist ACKS computer role playing game. When Borderlands would be an awesome sandbox. Yes, yes, it would be. Maybe I should do that one day. Oh, so here's a question for you. So in your book, do you talk about the pulp DNA of
Yes,
D&D?
because it's critical, and also it's a neglected section of the hobby's history. Now, I've not read all that much of it. I understand that it's a rather large corpus, but I've done Conan. I've read a fair amount of Elric. Three Hearts and Three Lions is now one of my favorite books. But to assist me with that, I got a hold of Jeffro Johnson's Appendix N, because it goes into a lot of that material, so I can reference this to show us the background of the hobby, and also how, because they had this background in pulp, they took all that cool stuff, they put it in a blender, and they just hit puree, and it was glorious.
Yeah.
What I did not expect going into this research is that so much of the hobby's background would be, we'd say isekai today, right? Where you got a person from our world, like Three Hearts and Three Lions in World War II, transported into a fantasy land where there's stuff going on, right? And then, of course, you've got the law and neutrality, chaos stuff coming in from Moorcock. And it's this cosmic struggle going on. And that stuff is great to read. And I've not been affected so much by some weird description as I have from Jack Vance recently. Because, Dying Earth is odd. And you have to think a little bit about what is being talked about. Plus, it also gives you the basis for the spell system. And even as soon as the game came out, people misunderstood it. Even though it says, the magic user gets one spell per day. Immediately in A&E, they were talking about, well, we don't like that. We're going to change that. We're going to have mages with armor. We're going to have mages with a number of spell points, equal to like half their intelligence or something like that. And also, they didn't read those books, unfortunately. That's why Appendix N is super important for our hobby. We need to cultivate that stuff. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I went back and read the books from Appendix N that I hadn't previously read after I read Jeffro's book. Jeffro's book was, it deserves the credit it got. Like, he really put Appendix N back on the map for D&D in a really important way. And it was really fascinating because it's like you're saying, it's like being at a restaurant and you eat this really good dish and you're like, wow, I wonder what combination of flavors made this dish. Yeah. And then Appendix N is that combination of flavors before the puree. And, or like seeing, for instance, I believe in the first novel of Fafard and the Grey Mouser, in one of the very first stories, we see the Grey Mouser like, oh, he was an apprentice magician when he was younger, and he can kind of fumble through using a scroll. And you're like, oh, that's literally the basis of the thief's ability to do that in AD&D.
But initially, there's no thief class, right? Because if you're reading Fafard and the Grey Mouser, where are they? You basically have a mage who's a thief and a fighter who's a thief, even if he's kind of a barbarian guy. But also, Fafard's got this great personality, and he's a skald. He likes to regale people with stories. You don't need stuff on your character sheet to do that kind of stuff. You just say it at the table.
Yeah. So let's see. Got some more comments here. Let's see. Chubby, there's a good comment. Settings are interesting to the degree they are unique and bring forth strong emotions. WotC cannot handle the emotions component.
This is fair, because the Forgotten Realms book for 5th edition was atrocious. I felt bad for buying it. It didn't give me any good info. I had to go to an old wiki to find stuff.
Yep, it's true. All right, Jurist has a good point. Jeffro's observation that the fiction that inspired D&D is utterly divorced from the fiction inspired by D&D is key in understanding the modern scene.
That's really good.
Yeah, that's right.
Because depending on your era, your D&D is Dragonlance, right? And the Hickman Revolution, which is the thing that happened in the hobby, changed the focus from kind of this, you go out and you want to become your adventurer, you conquer your king, to we're going to go do this epic story, and it's going to be awesome. You guys are playing these characters. And unfortunately, nobody really seems to die because of it.
Yeah.
Which, I'm going to throw it out there. Riceland should have had his little neck broken the first time he betrayed the party. Tanis, you should have done that.
To me, the most interesting example of this is the lit RPG genre, right? So, when we start off with fantasy, you have fantasy stories written about, heroes in a fantasy world. And then you have role-playing games, which is role-playing a hero in a fantasy world. Then you have the next generation of fantasy fiction, which is fantasy fiction about heroes in a fantasy world inspired by role-playing games. And then you get to the third generation where it is now so meta that you are no longer role-playing a hero in a fantasy world inspired by role-playing games. You're actually role-playing a gamer in a fantasy world, which is a game, right? Like we've entirely God, it's like we're trapped in some weird Baudrillard, simulacra, the real becomes the fake loop. We're trapped.
It's the Matrix, man. You got to read Appendix N, get out of it.
Yep.
But no, that self-insert issue is part of the problem. You're not playing a character, you're playing yourself. And it's this expression of yourself, whichever character is. But there's not that gap between, okay, this is how I'm going to interact with what the Dungeon Master is saying. It's, I'm the hero, I get the stuff. And because of that, there's less of a focus on the world.
Yeah.
And that focus on the world is actually kind of what drew me to Back Me Rules Cyclopedias because of the Mystara Gazetteers.
Yeah, same.
Because I got that whole series because I was under the impression, because of what was going on with the OGL, that stuff was just going to disappear. It wasn't going to be there anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Now, you said at the start of the show you're a professional DM.
Yes, that's actually been my business for 4 years now. So it's been interesting. You, of course, have your ups and downs and whatnot.
So as a professional DM, I'm curious, right? Let's talk about this a little bit as we wrap up the show here. What game do you run? Like, what do people demand to play?
Overwhelmingly 5th edition, but we have played other things. I've run Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, 4th edition. I have tested out some other games with the guys. We just tested out ACKS because we wrapped up Rise of the Drow, which is probably my favorite 5th edition adventure at this stage. And we've also done Old School Essentials and some other stuff. And this past Saturday, I actually played another game of my Rule Cyclopedia one, which is actually out of town. My games are only face-to-face, and I've got only one that's online right now. It's on Fridays.
Wow. Okay. That's interesting. That's the rare. So you're a professional GM who mostly runs face-to-face. That's rare.
Yeah, I got incredibly lucky. A friend of mine started a game store in town, and so I just started running games there. Okay, it was on Thursday nights, and then guys wanted another game. Okay, so I was like, okay, well, I'm buying a lot of books here. This is getting kind of expensive. Hey, just toss me a few bucks, and then I'll go get the new book. And then gradually, because COVID happens, the game store shuts down. I start changing things around to where I've got my day job, and then I've got my night job. And it eventually becomes the full-time job because my wife and I decided that it was time for us to start our family. And that gives me the opposite schedule of her. I'm working nights because of this. But the way we do things is pretty straightforward. You come, you bring your character. We typically riff on one of the adventure books. There's always dinner. There's beer in the fridge. We got all kinds of booze. It's basically a 21-up party. We have ourselves a good time. And you can just die, okay? Because we're here to play the game, and them's the rules.
So that was going to be my next question: was do you have an issue with character death when people are playing? Like, do they have an expectation of, well, I'm paying you, so I shouldn't die?
Well, no, because just about everybody has had a character who's died at my table at this stage. It happens. I have had to deal with people being angry before because that character died, but they weren't at the table. Because typically what we do is, look, because we're playing 5th edition, it's not really set up to where, you're staying away for this adventure. So our policy as a table is, okay, look, if you want, he'll go with the party. He did. And most recently, I had a character die, but he was also kind of hitting other players with his Cone of Cold. And so the monk, for a couple of months, eventually hatched a plan. The sorcerer in this case got a bit gored by a minotaur. And then he decides he's going to go over to where the guy is. And even though the player's not here at the time, he cracks him over the skull and just kills him. Wow. And then I looked up, I was like, where'd that come from? You don't hurt my friends.
Wow.
And so his bleeding corpse, is just right there. And then I got to tell the guy, hey, look, your character died. Here's the reason. And then, yeah, he got mad, but that's the game. Yeah. I'm not going to tell that player you can't do that in a game that's about free will and doing adventuring stuff.
Yeah. I talk about that. Those kind of challenges are some of the most interesting ones that a GM has to deal with.
You also have to be a bit
PvP.
of a rules lawyer because you're the authority on the game, which is why taking the role of the judge is also very important here. So
Yeah.
you have to be, first off, conversant, second off, consistent, and depending on how things go, willing to change your mind once in a while, depending on the situation of the game. And that has had to happen. We've changed things. We've gone back. I've misinterpreted something. So, there's some flexibility involved, but everybody's aware that you're being fair. And then because of that, it's a good game.
Yeah. So how many sessions do you run a week then, doing it as a professional?
Presently, got 3. I had to drop Monday nights because I've got a lot of stuff going on that night for the rest of the year.
Mm-hmm.
So that's it right now. And because of that, I'll have time to read and do a lot of writing because of that, supporting the Kickstarter, of course.
Yep.
And to some extent, that experience is going to wind up in the book, where I can talk about how this is DMing in this game, and this is how it changes over time.
Yep.
I've also considered looking into that Start Playing service because they've got people who are looking for DMs, and there might be a way to market myself outside of kind of my local guys.
Yeah.
Because I kind of live in the middle of nowhere in Indiana, so that of course limits my reach. And then of course you got to be worried about pricing and inflation and what else is going on. And so you have to make these decisions, but you don't know what the output's going to be.
Yeah. So, well, that is our hour and a half. Before we end, I want to call back to where we started at the beginning of the show, which was Dom is doing a Kickstarter right now. It is for a book called Dungeons and Dragons, an American Institution. He launched it simultaneous with our stream tonight. The link is in the description below. I hope you guys will check it out. So the focus of his book is to sort of tell the true story of what happened, and to kind of right some of the wrongs that were done to the reputation of our founders of our hobby, with the recent books that came out last year, and which I think is a really noble cause. And doing it with a professionally trained historian's background, which is awesome. So, Dom, you want to say any final words on the product or anything as we close out here?
Let's address historiography for just a moment. I'm actually getting hot in here. It's impressive.
I mean, you're wearing full plate, man.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, when you're in fact doing professional history, what you have to do is to evoke and bring up what was going on at the time in that place. Okay, you have to talk about how people thought, how they approach things, and then when you do that, you actually allow the subject to speak for itself. Okay, you as the historian are an observer. Yes, you have to exercise some judgment. You actually have to talk about some issues in interpretation, but by stepping back and actually letting the subject speak for itself, you actually allow something akin to truth to actually come out. We can't get outside the meat suit. This is true. But because we can reason, because we can collate sources, check things out, compare them to other stuff, and we can then chart what happens over time. Okay. So by approaching this with a fair amount of modesty and trying to cleave to the facts as much as we can, you get not only a better product, you also get a truer thing at the end. And that's my opinion on all this.
Makes total sense to me. Well, I'm going to back it. I hope other folks will as well. It's something that needs to be done to set the record straight and kind of, if we don't make sure our voices are heard in the narrative, then they will just be lost, and history will be told by the other side only. So
precisely,
we can't let that happen. Thanks so much for coming on the show tonight, and frankly for taking the time to write a book like D&D and American Institution. That's awesome that you're doing it.
Thanks for having me here.
Excellent. Okay, everybody, thanks for joining us for another night of Axe to Grind, our 25th episode. I will be back again in a week or 2 or 3 at some point when I stream again, and I will see you all then. Cheers for now.
Bye.